Hi, I wanted to record a short video um, for lesson 9 for students that actually didn't attend that class on that evening. It will, it will be a compressed one, so the assumption is that you already download the notes and perhaps you got a chance to read through the notes. If not, then these, excuse me, this quick lecture will hopefully motivate you to actually read the notes further. Okay, so the topic is physical environmental security, and that's what we'll do. The purpose is to understand from a security standpoint, why, from information security standpoint, why is physical and environmental security actually important? How is it related? And how to protect some of the guidelines to protect physical facilities, protect external and environmental threats, and understand the requirement in working in secure areas. So remember that triangle that we have talked about in lesson 1. Well, we talked about 3 triangles. This is the second triangle. There is 3 aspects of security. The cyber side, which is information security that we talk about, the network and so on. And then we also talk a lot about security around people. And in fact, in the previous lesson, we talked about personnel security. And there's also a third component often being overlooked from information security professionals is the physical security. Often, most of the background of information security professionals are IT people. So traditionally, we never really look at this aspect of security. But as you can imagine, if the physical security is compromised, then your information security will also compromise most of the time. Just imagine the information we are protecting, even though you say they are all electronics, right? So why bother about physical? But the electronic information has to be stored, hosted, and transmitted in some sort of physical media. Talking about databases, hard drive, servers, network cables, router, all those are physical stuff. So sure, you have all the logical, we call logical, right? Logical protection controls around the data, the electronic data. But if the physical aspect of those information assets are not protected correctly or accurately or sufficiently, then the security will still be compromised. Just imagine, yeah, you had all the access control on the databases, but if people break in and steal the whole hard drive and so on, they'll figure it out. They'll get to those data. So it is important to have that understanding. Okay. This slide talks about some of the purposes. As you can see, that to prevent unauthorized physical access, to prevent any harm, damage, or interference to the physical premises, as well as any equipment that are stored in those physical locations and facilities. Okay, because any critical or sensitive information processing facilities. So we're talking about data centers, server rooms, and so on. Of course, now more and more the data are being stored in huge air-conditioned, air-controlled environment called data center. The security around where a lot of electronic data, which are valuable informations that are stored in these facilities, need to be protected. Okay. Okay, so you can read the rest. And first thing is, of course, the perimeter. So we're talking about any perimeters around the physical facilities. If you had a factories, a campus, then you need to have some sort of barriers. You know, I mean, to most of us, if we work in normal, regular offices, this may not be trivial to you. But if you have major facilities, sometimes a military installation, or maybe a large-scale data center or multiple data centers, the perimeter is the first line of defense. Okay, so here are some of the guidelines that the fence would have to be maybe higher. The perimeters, the building, the wall, the fence, and so on has to be sound. You know, from a physical building point of view, that it cannot be easily compromised or overrun and so on. Solid construction. If you don't really have a fence, I think the previous diagram kind of gives you an impression that it's kind of like a fence, but not necessarily. I mean, if it is a building, then the outward of the building include windows and doors, so you want to secure those so window cannot be easily, broken in, and so on, right? So those need to be locked, and if those are just regular glasses and you can change into unbreakable glasses, you might want to have a fence or a frame or a window protection so that even people break the glass, they cannot physically come in. You know what I mean, right? And then for physical areas, it is, excuse me, it is perhaps advisable to have a reception area so that visit can be controlled and so on. Okay. Again, any physical barrier will have to be complied to local fire codes, fail-safe manner, and so on. And it is advisable to have any intrusion detection system. So it could be like alarm if people break in. It could be video cameras. We'll talk about that later on. Okay, some of the tips here. Physical protection can be achieved by creating barriers. So we talk about several layer of barrier or layer of defense. Then we talk about, even though within a physical building you had the entrance into the main office, but if your data center or server room or data room within your facility, then you may want to have another layer, obviously have another card key control or secure control, so that people break into your office is not automatically accessible to your sensitive data. So you want to have that kind of layer. You probably witnessed this in your office that they have a different card key, different control, different check-in for for the data center or the server room even, right? Okay, for security entry control, very obviously the idea is that you need to control the access. Apart from building it physically well, having a security guard or receptions, there are bound to be multiple entry points to a building, right? Just for efficiency purposes and so on. You want to not only control all of the points, but be able to record, especially with entry points that are not being manned by a reception or security guard. So security card, access card is a very common approach, okay? And we'll look at entry control, what we can do. One of the things that we recommend people to do is to have the capability to record the day and time and the person that actually accessed that. So using an access card would be ideal, because the access card, like indicated in this diagram, the access card will have to swipe or contact with the reader. The reader will know which card by the serial number, and each card should be associated with a unique personnel. Then this person at this date and time at this reader, so we know which entry point this particular employee, consultant, or third-party person has accessed this entry point through the reader. Okay. Apart from just the card key, we also recommend to wear some form of visible identification, especially you had an organization that had many employees, like any organization more than 100, 200, it's kind of impossible for you to know everybody, right? So within the facility, of course, we're talking about some organizations that are thousands. So because you don't know everybody, and you want to encourage a culture of security, so that if everybody wear a visible badge with their pictures usually and their name, then at least when you cross by, you saw that when they have the badge, then this is a legitimate person or part of the employee, part of the team. If the card look differently, or if they don't have the card, then you can come up to them and gently challenge them and ask them if you don't know them, right? If you know them, that's okay. You know what I mean? So the visible identification is important, okay? But one caution of that is that the identification should not have any address of where that identification should is able to access. Often nowadays, the access card and the badge are kind of stick together as one. If you lose your badge, then you're losing your access key, or if it's just a card, then people can impersonate you and be able to know where exactly you work so that they know where to go. So most of the card key now or badge doesn't really have a physical location. They just maybe have a company name and have a little message that if you pick it up at if you found this in anywhere, return to a mailbox or something like that. Okay. Access rights should be to the security area should be regularly reviewed and updated and revoked if necessary. If someone no longer working in that location, he or she doesn't really need that access any longer, it should be revoked. Okay. Security cameras. I mean, nowadays, we're so used to having security cameras. Security cameras are very useful in terms of twofold. First, of course, is to record any activities that you can go back to. There is absolutely no way that in any large size facility that you have enough security personnel to monitor the activity. So having a camera is kind of godsend, right? Like you can have cameras in area that you don't really frequent, but at least you have a physical record of what happened there. So oftentimes, if the cameras are not being monitored live, then it can be used as a forensic. Now, in camera that are focusing on prime areas like entrance to the physical data center or very sensitive area, then those may be monitored. But if monitoring the cameras is not something that you have resources to do, then at least you had cameras sufficiently enough to control the key entrance. So key entrance to any sensitive locations that housed sensitive electronic data need to be monitored by security cameras. And security cameras also, one of the things that you have to remember is the footage. The footage often, because of limited capacity of the storage, get overwritten periodically, overwritten in a week or something like that. So you want to make sure that you had a sufficient storage for enough time that the images will not overwrite each other too quickly, that it will not help you for any forensic investigation. Okay. A month is a good starting point, but again, it depends on how heavy the traffics are in those areas. Okay, securing office, room, and facilities. So these are like general office, physical security of the office, or rooms within the office, or the facility as a whole. The physical security has to be designed together when you first design the office. So you think through where in the office would be dedicated as a secure area for elevated privilege access, for sensitive data and so on. Okay. Again, health and safety regulation has to be respected and considered when you build it. So a good example would be circulation of air. You wanted to kind of condor off all the air intake, but then it becomes stuffy and it becomes a health hazard and so on. Let me step back. So one of the things about these traditionally is not part of information security is because all of these physical stuff are very different with the regular training that we have because we were IT people most likely. I'm not saying that you have to learn all of these, and oftentimes in big enough facilities, there's probably a physical security group or corporate security or facility. Okay, I think what I wanted to articulate this information to you is that often as an information security professional in an organization, you might be invited to a meeting designing for a new office with storage of sensitive information that they want to pick your brain in terms of your suggestions. And you may even review, which is I did in my involvement, is I did review some of the security requirements around data centers, server rooms, and so on. When you establish a reputation and the credential, being an information security person within your organization, people will look to you for advice. So these are the things, background that I want you to have in order to understand. These are the things that we look for from a security environment. The physical theft, access, and break-in and damage are usually the concern of physical security, corporate facilities, and so on. But for us, we look further in terms of logging, audit log of the access, the day and time that we talk about, entry access, and we talked about perimeter security and so on, and now we talk about secure room. Okay. One of the things interesting in point 3 is that where applicable, the building should not be providing too much information about what it does and so on. So like a data center, it would be silly to say that this is CIBC's data center. So you're telling people like, come here, break in here. We got a lot of information here. So oftentimes, if you're not part of the data team, then even people working in the bank do not know where their data centers are. Okay, and that's the idea. You don't want anybody to know where your sensitive information assets are being stored. Okay, and the other thing about people, often publish their employee directories in the front door with a phone there. Now I know that this is often the practice when that location doesn't have a reception. Okay, and because you don't have a reception, they want to keep a phone and a list of employee outside so people can call, right? Now nowadays everybody have a cell phone, and you can and people to visit there are supposed to know who they come for, right? So it's especially in a sensitive location, a data center and so on, do not publish your directory. Now, if you do actually work in a facility that doesn't really have a reception area, and you need to have some sort of contact, designated 2 or 3 people in your organization, depending on how big, as the contact person. Only publish those number, and do not even provide the name and the title of that person they're calling. Okay, you can say, just put the name Michael. Don't say that the full name or something like that. You know what I mean? If you really have to give some number for the external visitor, like dropping off a packet or something like that, so you need to have maybe a couple of administrative person's name on the door, so that people can call them. Okay, or maybe buzz in. Okay, just a buzz. Okay, something like that. So the idea is, do not give away too much information outside of the organization, like putting it outside. Okay, so we talk a little bit about the external environmental threat. So here is not so much of security, but it's very related. So we're talking about environmental and external threats. So we're talking fire, earthquake, hurricane, power outage, storm, and so on. So all of these, a lot of them are physical, and some are man-made, like civil unrest, like terrorism and strike and so on. If you work in a facility whereby you have a lot of workers, unions, and strike, it's a common occurrence, like once a year, once every other years. If you have multiple union, that's going to happen every year. What happens is sometimes when you have a work stoppage or a strike, it can get ugly. So some of the employee can go too far as to trying to damage the facility, right? So you needed to kind of cater that when you're defining security. Okay. Yeah. So this is self-explanatory. So you want to cater for hazardous and combustion materials. Some of those are kind of self-explanatory and maybe even common sense, but it's good to kind of review them when you are participating in building a secure facility. Okay, so we're talking about working in a secure area. So assuming that you had a data center or some sort of area that are considered as secure, like a lab, or a lab environment, not necessarily like medical lab. It could be just design lab, right? in an environment whereby you design chips, you know, that you needed to be air control, dust control, and so on. So you want to think about the physical protection for secure areas, how it should be designed, and so on. Now, uh, people should only aware, same thing, that is a secure area on a need-to-know basis. So you don't really, again, within the company, within your own employee, you don't want to advertise, hey, that's a data room. So you put a big banner there that tell people that's the data room. So again, you know, there are people, there are visitors. You don't want them to kind of know any information more than necessary. Even within employees, using the need to know basis rule, right? And if that is a secure area, any visitor should not be unsupervised. So a data center would be a good example. You had, service provider come in to fix things. Those need to be supervised, especially if they are in an area whereby they can actually do damage to the physical equipments, devices that will contain restrictive or sensitive information. Okay. Any vacant area should be physically logged and should be monitored. Apart from being a camera, that should be checked periodically, and so on. I mean, even if you put in a padlock, after several years, if it's externally facing, it could get rusted and it could break, right? Photographic, video, or audio, or other equipment such as camera, mobile device. Nowadays, we all have a mobile phone, and every mobile phone is a recording device. Should not be allowed unless it's authorized. Okay? Why is it important? You don't want people to know if they visit your data center. You don't want people to know where is the fire prevention area, where is your air conditioning, how your raised floor is being developed, where you put the servers, where you put the databases, where you put the router and the telecommunication equipment. So, asking visitors and even employees to leave those devices outside the data room. Now, nobody is working in a data room the whole 8 hours. I mean, data room should not have a work desk there. People go into the data center or the server room only to do certain work. So when they go in, they will do a certain task, and when they finish, they should leave. So that's the idea, right? So all of these equipment that I talked about should not be allowed to bring in, because they will allow them to record information that otherwise could be highly restricted and sensitive. Okay. So other areas that we might overlook, like loading zone. Loading zone is whereby loading zone is an entry point, but often we overlook them because it's like not for normal people. They just deliver, supplies and so on. Sometimes you allow them to kind of dump the information at the loading zone, and then you will have employee to pick it up tomorrow and so on. So there are access into your building, although they are probably being condo off, but they can plant stuff there. Okay, so those access points need to be considered. You might need to put a camera there. If you had security guard that you can monitor them, that's even better. Or any unloading will have to be contact the appropriate department to receive them at the loading zone. That's even better. So there is always your internal people to supervise people that are unloading stuff. Equipment security. So if we had equipment that need to be moved around, need to be transported, and we needed to protect them. And oftentimes, laptop is the most vulnerable devices, because like nowadays, a lot of employees have laptops. It's not a status symbol any longer what it used to be. It is actually a necessity, especially if you had a mobile workforce, right? So everybody have a laptop, and laptop on both sense that I mentioned before, it has a value physically that you can sell a laptop. Even though laptops are getting cheaper, it itself can actually be sold for over $1,000 sometimes for the better ones. So the executive have maybe $2,000. But on the other hand, the data that's stored on the laptops are even more valuable at times. So apart from that, any equipments need to be physically protected in an environment where they are normally being stored, being used, and so on. The other security concern is when the equipments, including computers, devices, are being disposed, you want to make sure that all the data are being wiped and written over so that nobody can actually kind of go back and open up the disk drive. Disk drive is, when you delete something, it's not really erased, so to speak. It's just changed the pointer, so the data are still there. So you need to overwrite with all zeros on the hard drive to make sure nobody can able to see anything that are from before. Okay. Yeah, so protection of equipment also need to be protected from environmental threats, not just from theft, and so these are some of the controls, like theft, fire, explosives, smoke, water, and so on. Computer equipment are very sensitive. I mean, a variation of temperatures can affect them, can affect the effectiveness. You're talking about high power servers, computing devices, and storage devices. If you had a lot of dust, if you have high humidities and so on, it will create problems in those devices. Not to mention about electromagnetic radiations and so on. And vandalism is always a problem, right? I mean, they can damage the stuff. And eating, drinking, and smoking actually bring in a lot of vulnerability in terms of introducing moisture and so on into the sensitive area. So that those should be prohibited. Okay, in a data center, you never were able to bring a coffee into the data center. Okay, lightning protection and so on. So you can read the stuff. Supporting utilities, you're talking about UPS or uninterrupted power supply. We want to be able to plan for eventuality of losing of power, losing of air conditioning, heating, and ventilation. So you need to design procedures. Now, often in a data center, right now we're quite mature in this field that the security of data centers are often the security requirements for things like that. When there's a power failure, they actually have devices that suck out all the oxygen within the data center. So it's important that the people that work in a data center, those raised floor, highly air conditioning environment, usually when an alarm sounds for fire, then it is very important for people to evacuate from the data center, and then the data center will lock up, air seal, and then the device will actually suck out all the oxygen. That fire will only burn when there's oxygen. So one of the ways, instead of splitting water, which is damaging to the equipment, they suck out the oxygen in the room to put out the fire. Okay, so that's why it's important that you don't really want to be in there. You don't want anyone to be in there, because when oxygen are being sucked out, people will die too. But it's a very effective way for data center to put out fire. UPS we talked about. You want to have emergency power off switch, so that you can have an emergency power off, rapid power down in case of emergency, and so on. And then obviously emergency lighting if you don't have windows, and other bright sources and so on. A generator maybe. I mean, if you had problem with continuous supply and so on, and water supply if you had water cool equipment and so on. Okay, so a whole bunch of stuff. So you have to have alarm to notifying you if you had a problem and so on with any of the environmental factor, variation of temperature, too cold, too hot, humidity variation, dust, air quality, fire, heat, and so on. Obviously moisture. Those are always monitoring, and those are often, just for information, for any real data center, and you can get those you can get those security requirements for data center easily in order to kind of beef up the knowledge if that's what you want. Okay. Equipment maintenance. This is just to make a point that regular equipment maintenance is actually very important to maintain the security. Why? Because if if the IT manager are skipping by saving costs of maintaining the system, then the system will run into a situation that because of lack of maintenance, they'll run into problems, they'll crash, they'll lose information, and that's compromise of security to some degree. Okay, when you are allowing people to conduct maintenance, again, you want to make sure that the people that come to conduct the maintenance, these people must be authorized, sign off, and supervised, and so on. Okay, and you keep track of any problems, fault of the equipment, so that in maintenance those can be fixed and looked at, and so on. So don't just kind of struck it off as, oh, nothing, you just reboot it and that's fine. No, you need to write down those errors. When you remove any equipment or other physical properties, you need to have a process. You need to have the right people to with the right authority to remove them, and especially for equipment that contain data, I talk about that, and you want to make sure that those are removed, erased before it can be moved off the location. Okay. Yeah, so there are some more considerations for physical removal of properties. Okay, so these subsequent few slides just talk about in the industry, there are assessments that company can obtain to prove they had a physical environment. So there are SOC report, SOC report that are for a company to to pay some company to come and do an assessment and produce a report. There are three types of reports: SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, and within SOC 1 there's actually two. SOC stands for Service Organization Control. You don't have to know about these too much. You just need to know that there are industry standards that company can get those reports to certify they are secure. All the physical securities are being implemented. Okay, there are different levels and so on, and it's good to kind of have a look what those are. Some are just point in time assessment, some are continue monitoring, and so on. There is a SOC 2 report that are more for us, information security and privacy. SOC 1 report is all those physical security we talked about, SOC 1, Type 2, and Type 1 and Type 2, which is the most often one. SOC 2 report is gaining popularity, which are more for us, like privacy, security, availability, and so on at the CIA. Okay, and then SOC 3 is more like a marketing. It's like a high-level report that are for general customers, but describe that the facilities has gone through and explain their physical protection. Okay, so that's it. We want to make sure that physical and environmental securities are not being overlooked from information security. I explained why, and because physical facilities and equipment are also valuable to the organization, apart from the actual value of the asset, but also whatever the asset contains. Often for information security, information technology devices, it contains data. Okay, so we need to be involved at the table for any physical security discussions and planning as well. Okay, so I'm going to pause and just